There comes a moment in every human life when strength is no longer defined by the body, by energy or by youth, but by the quiet interior force that holds a person together. It is the strength that does not shout. It is the strength that does not announce itself. It is the strength that reveals itself only when circumstances press, when the world grows uncertain, when the wind of confusion begins to blow through the soul. This is the realm of mental strength, a reality as old as humanity itself, and yet one that remains misunderstood. For most people, mental strength is imagined as sheer willpower, an inner stubbornness, a resolve to endure no matter the cost. But mental strength, as understood through the wisdom of Maimonides, is not a clenched fist inside the mind. It is not the tightening of emotional muscles. It is a harmony of the intellect and the emotions, a disciplined balance between what we know, what we feel, and what we choose. The human dilemma begins here. We live in a world that demands resilience, but rarely teaches us how to craft it. We are told to be strong, but not how to shape strength. We are told to stay calm, but not how to cultivate calmness. We are told to control our thoughts, but not how to train the mind, so that thoughts themselves become instruments of clarity rather than agents of chaos. Every generation faces this silent crisis. Anxieties multiply, decisions overwhelm, desires conflict. Expectations weigh heavily, and beneath the surface a deeper tension unfolds. The mind that longs for wisdom is often the same mind that is restless, conflicted, pulled in opposite directions by emotion, impulse, doubt, and fear. The modern world has given us information, but not understanding, speed, but not stability, stimulation, but not serenity. To speak of mental strength, then, is to address the most universal conflict of all, the struggle between what we aspire to be and what we are in the ordinary turbulence of life. It is the struggle between the clarity of reason and the pull of emotion. It is the struggle between the inner world we wish to build and the external world that constantly challenges that construction. Maimonides understood this long before psychology had a language for it. He saw that the deepest human challenges arise not from material poverty or external obstacles, but from the inability to govern the inner faculties of the soul. A person can possess wealth, yet be mentally fragile. A person can be praised, yet be inwardly tormented. A person can achieve success, yet be unable to govern their impulses, handle adversity, or maintain equilibrium when fortune shifts. In this sense, the human dilemma is not merely emotional, it is existential. The mind, left untrained, becomes a battlefield, and without guidance, most people wage war against themselves without knowing the rules of engagement. Consider how easily we are thrown off balance. A single insult can disturb an entire day. A moment of uncertainty can cloud judgment for hours. A passing fear can weaken resolve. A temporary failure can shatter confidence. This is the fragile architecture of the untrained inner life. Maimonides writes about the soul, much as a physician writes about the body. Every imbalance has a cause, every symptom an underlying disorder, every disorder a treatment. If we observe ourselves honestly, we notice how often we are controlled by what we never chose. Thoughts appear uninvited. Emotions rise unexpectedly. Impulses rush in without permission. We react faster than we can reflect. We speak before we understand. We commit before we discern. And as the cycle repeats, the mind begins to lose sovereignty over its own kingdom. The dilemma deepens because the mind is capable of extraordinary clarity, yet it is perpetually vulnerable to distortion. Fear magnifies threat. Desire reshapes perception. Anger closes the avenues of reason. Pride blinds judgment. Anxiety narrows the horizon of possibilities. Each of these forces, left unmanaged, weakens the inner structure that Maimonides saw as central to a life of wisdom. Mental strength, then, is not simply resilience in adversity. It is the art of maintaining the integrity of the mind despite the countless forces that threaten to fracture it. The question becomes, what is the source of this strength? Where does it come from? How is it formed? Is it inherited, or is it cultivated? Is it a natural gift, or is it a discipline? Maimonides offers an answer that is radically different from what most modern thinkers propose. For him, mental strength begins not with emotion, but with understanding, not with impulse, but with reason, not with external motivation, but with internal structure. The wise mind does not resist emotion by suppressing it. It manages emotion by knowing its nature. The mentally strong person is not the one who feels less, but the one who sees more clearly. This approach stands in contrast to the contemporary obsession with techniques, hacks, and quick formulas. Maimonides was not interested in shortcuts. He was interested in the transformation of the entire human being. Mental strength, in his view, is inseparable from moral strength, intellectual clarity, and spiritual purpose. It is not a trait but a harmony. It is not an instinct but a craft. And yet, this harmony often eludes us. We live in fragments. We act on emotion, but justify with reason. We aspire to wisdom, but are pulled by desire. We know what is right, but fail to do it. We seek peace, but cultivate habits that undermine it. The human condition is marked by this perpetual fragmentation, and it is here that the search for mental strength becomes the search for unity within the self. This is why the dilemma is at once psychological and spiritual. A fragmented soul cannot be strong. Only a unified soul can withstand the pressures of life. Only a mind guided by wisdom can maintain clarity when confronted with confusion. Only a heart trained in balance can remain steady in moments of turbulence. Maimonides saw mental strength as one of the highest human achievements because it allows a person to live not as a hostage of circumstance, but as an agent of purpose. It is the ability to respond instead of react, to think instead of collapse, to choose instead of being carried by forces one does not understand. And so the question before us is the same question Maimonides faced in his own century. How does a human being cultivate a mind that remains whole in a world that constantly seeks to divide it? How does one harness the intellect, govern the emotions, elevate the soul, and walk through life with clarity rather than confusion? This is the dilemma from which the Maimonidean path to mental strength emerges. To understand mental strength, according to Maimonides, we must step into the intellectual world he crafted, a world where reason is the guiding light, balance is the governing principle, and the human soul is a vast landscape that must be cultivated with the same care as a physician tending to a delicate body. Maimonides approached the inner life with a depth that was revolutionary. Unlike thinkers who focused primarily on religious duty or emotional piety, he believed that the true transformation of a human being begins with the refinement of the mind. In his writings, especially in the 8 chapters and the Guide for the Perplexed, the mind is not merely a participant in life's struggles. It is the instrument through which a person perceives reality, shapes character, and approaches the divine. For him, mental strength was inseparable from intellectual clarity. Confusion was not simply an emotional burden, it was a spiritual obstacle. To live without understanding was, in his view, to walk through life with a dim lamp. And so he sought to illuminate not simply belief, but the entire architecture of the human psyche. He begins with a foundational insight. The soul is composed of faculties, each with its function, each capable of order or disorder. There is the faculty of desire, the faculty of imagination, the faculty of emotion, and the faculty of intellect. Mental strength arises when these faculties are aligned under the guidance of reason, just as health arises when the organs of the body perform their functions in harmony. Maimonides writes as a physician of the spirit. Just as the body falls ill when one organ overpowers the others, The soul falls into disorder when emotion dominates intellect, or when desire overpowers moral clarity, or when imagination spins illusions that the mind mistakes for truth. This imbalance, he argues, is the source of anxiety, anger, impulsiveness, and all the forms of inner weakness that cloud judgment and corrupt action. Mental strength, therefore, is not an emotional condition, but an intellectual mastery. It is the capacity to see things as they are, to understand their true nature, and to allow that understanding to guide one's response. Truth strengthens, illusion weakens. For Maimonides, this principle is the cornerstone of the well-ordered mind. One of his most important teachings on the subject is the doctrine of the golden mean, the path of moderation, which appears both in the 8 chapters and in the Mishneh Torah. Here he draws from Aristotle, but transforms the idea through the lens of Jewish ethics. Excessive emotion is a form of weakness. Deficient emotion is also a form of weakness. The strong mind is the one that knows how to dwell in the middle, not because the middle is safe, but because the middle is true. A person who becomes easily angered is fragile. A person who never becomes angry is also fragile. The one who can direct anger with wisdom is strong. A person who follows every impulse is unstable. A person who suppresses every desire is equally unstable. The strong person is the one whose desires are governed, illuminated, and refined. In Maimonides' framework, mental strength is the fruit of disciplined balance. It is not the denial of emotion, but the education of emotion. It is not the suppression of desire, but the alignment of desire with reason. It is not the absence of fear, but the recognition of fear's proper place. This approach emerges most clearly when Maimonides discusses the imagination. For him, imagination is both a gift and a danger. It allows humans to visualize abstract ideas, to create, to anticipate, and to aspire. But imagination, untamed, becomes the source of superstition, fear, distortion, and confusion. A person ruled by imagination cannot think clearly. They live in a world shaped by shadows and illusions. Thus, mental strength emerges when imagination serves the intellect rather than overpowering it. When a person cannot distinguish between what they imagine and what is real, they lose the ability to navigate life with stability. Maimonides insists that mental clarity depends on rigorous discernment, on the habitual practice of distinguishing truth from appearance. In the Guide for the Perplexed, he extends this idea even further. Confusion between metaphor and reality, he warns, leads to theological error, emotional instability, and intellectual weakness. Mental strength, in his higher sense, is the ability to penetrate beyond appearances and rise toward a deeper understanding of the world, of oneself, and of God. But Maimonides does not treat mental strength solely as an intellectual matter. He recognizes the profound interdependence between the body and the mind. His medical writings reveal an intuition that parallels modern psychology. The mind cannot be strong when the body is neglected. Excessive eating, insufficient rest, emotional strain, and physical imbalance weaken the mind. A weakened body clouds judgment and destabilizes the emotions. Wisdom, therefore, is holistic. The strong mind rests within a balanced life. Spiritual clarity requires physical discipline. Intellectual rigor requires emotional health. All these dimensions must converge. Maimonides also warns that the greatest enemy of mental strength is habit poorly formed. A person who repeatedly gives in to anger conditions the soul to be angry. A person who repeatedly succumbs to fear trains the mind to retreat. A person who indulges in fantasy conditions the imagination to dominate. Thus, weakness is not merely a momentary failing, it becomes a pattern, one that binds the soul like a chain. But the opposite is also true. Strength is built through repetition. Calmness is learned. Discernment is sharpened, restraint becomes natural, the mind, like the body, is shaped by the habits it practices. There is another dimension to Maimonides' view, one often overlooked: humility. Not resignation, but intellectual humility. For him, the mind grows strong not by believing it knows everything, but by recognizing the limits of its understanding. Arrogance blinds. Certainty without inquiry corrupts judgment. The strong mind is open to truth, willing to revise itself, capable of questioning its own assumptions. In this way, mental strength becomes not a posture of dominance, but a posture of clarity. It is the ability to remain steady because one is aligned with reality, not with illusion or impulse. It is the quiet mastery of the inner faculties, each in its proper place, each guided by the light of understanding. Ultimately, for Maimonides, mental strength is the foundation of spiritual life. He believed that the path to God begins with the refinement of the mind. A clouded mind cannot rise toward truth. A fragmented soul cannot approach the divine. A person who is governed by emotion cannot perceive the subtlety of existence. Mental strength is the doorway through which wisdom enters the human soul. And through wisdom, one ascends toward a higher form of life, one defined not by reaction, but by purpose, not by confusion, but by understanding, not by fear, but by insight. To understand how Maimonides unites mental strength with spiritual elevation, one must step into the deeper architecture of his thought. For him, the human being is not divided between body and soul, reason and faith, intellect and devotion. These are not opposing forces but complementary dimensions of the same inner structure. Mental strength is not merely a psychological achievement, it is a spiritual ascent. It is the refinement of the human being into a vessel capable of perceiving truth and living in alignment with it. The transformation begins with clarity. In the view of Maimonides, the intellect is the highest faculty of the human soul, the place where truth takes form. But this intellect cannot operate in isolation. It must illuminate and guide the emotional and imaginative faculties, not by suppressing them, but by harmonizing them. This harmony is the essence of mental strength and at the same time the gateway to the spiritual life. In this sense, Maimonides' path is not one of withdrawal from the world. It is not the silence of monastic life, nor the intensity of mystical ecstasy. It is the disciplined journey of understanding. For him, spiritual growth is not a flight from reality, but a deeper comprehension of it. When the mind perceives truth clearly, it naturally ascends toward a higher plane of existence. This ascent is what he calls the intellectual love of God. The spiritual synthesis begins with the recognition that knowledge and devotion are not separate pursuits. True devotion arises from knowledge. True reverence for God is born from understanding the order, complexity, and wisdom embedded in creation. The more the mind perceives, the more the heart is moved. The more the intellect comprehends, the more the soul awakens. Mental strength, therefore, becomes a form of spiritual clarity, the ability to see beyond the noise of emotion and grasp the deeper structure of existence. Maimonides describes the human condition as one in which most people live in a fog of confusion. They see the world through the lens of imagination, impulse, or fear, and so their spiritual life is unstable, swayed by superstition or emotional turmoil. But when the mind becomes strong, when it is able to examine reality with rigor, sincerity, and discipline, that fog begins to lift. The world becomes coherent. Life becomes intelligible. God becomes not a distant abstraction, but the source of all wisdom. This is why, for Maimonides, the cultivation of the intellect is not merely an intellectual pursuit. It is a sacred duty. The mind is the instrument through which the human being connects with the divine. Without clarity, there is no elevation. Without understanding, there is no devotion. Without mental strength, the soul remains trapped in confusion. But the spiritual synthesis does not end with thought. It extends into character. The mind may perceive truth, but without emotional balance, the perception remains incomplete. Maimonides insists that virtue is essential to spiritual life. The soul must be purified of extremes, anger, pride, fear, gluttony, jealousy. These are not simply moral failings. They are distortions of perception. They cloud the intellect, weaken judgment, and impede the ascent toward God. To cultivate virtue is to clear the path so that the light of understanding may shine without obstruction. A calm mind perceives truth more readily. A moderate heart responds to life with greater clarity. A disciplined imagination avoids the illusions that lead the soul astray. This is the inner harmony that lies at the heart of the spiritual life. The synthesis deepens when we consider Maimonides' vision of prophecy. In his writings, prophecy is not a supernatural interruption of nature. It is the highest expression of human potential. It occurs when the intellect is perfected, when the imagination is refined, when the emotions are disciplined, and when the individual lives in moral harmony. Prophecy is the full integration of the soul's faculties. It is the pinnacle of mental strength, expressed as spiritual illumination. In this sense, prophecy represents the ideal form of human life: clarity of mind, balance of emotion, harmony of character, and profound awareness of the divine. While most people may never reach this level, Maimonides presents it as a guiding ideal. The closer one comes to this harmony, the more refined the soul becomes. Mental strength becomes not merely resilience, but the capacity to participate in a higher order of understanding. The core of this synthesis lies in the idea that the human mind, when properly cultivated, becomes a mirror of divine wisdom. The more one understands, the more one aligns with the order of creation. The more one attunes the mind to truth, the more one participates in the harmony of the universe. Mental strength, therefore, is not simply a personal asset. It is the pathway to a life that resonates with deeper meaning. Here, the ethical and the spiritual converge. Maimonides teaches that every ethical act shapes the soul. Acts of generosity soften the heart. Acts of restraint strengthen the will. Acts of justice refine judgment. Ethical discipline becomes spiritual discipline. The soul becomes harmonized through consistent action, and the mind gains clarity when moral confusion is eliminated. Mental strength becomes, in this light, the discipline to align one's inner life with truth. It is the refusal to let emotion dominate reason. It is the refusal to let imagination distort understanding. It is the refusal to let impulse govern action. It is the insistence on living in accordance with what is real, not with what is merely felt or desired. This integrity of perception is both intellectual and spiritual. The spiritual synthesis reaches its fullness when the individual discovers that mental strength is not merely self-mastery, but self-transcendence. The mind becomes strong not to dominate life, but to understand it. The intellect refines itself not to accumulate knowledge, but to approach the divine. The soul becomes disciplined not to achieve power, but to achieve harmony. This is why Maimonides sees the intellectual love of God as the highest form of worship. It is not emotional intensity, but clarity of understanding that elevates the soul. When the mind sees clearly, the heart responds with reverence. When the intellect grasps the order of creation, the soul feels the presence of the Creator. When the inner life is balanced, the divine order resonates within the human being. Mental strength, then, becomes a form of spiritual communion. In this way, Maimonides offers a path that unites reason and faith, intellect and devotion, clarity and reverence. The strong mind is the mind that knows how to see. The strong soul is the soul that knows how to align with truth. This is the synthesis at the heart of his philosophy, a life in which the pursuit of understanding becomes the pursuit of God, and the cultivation of the mind becomes the elevation of the spirit. The teachings of Maimonides do not end in philosophical contemplation. They are meant to be lived, shaped into daily habits, woven into the quiet rhythms of ordinary life. Mental strength, in his view, is not an abstract condition, but a disciplined craft. It grows through actions repeated, thoughts examined, emotions refined, and choices made with intention. What follows is a practical path inspired by his wisdom, a way to translate the harmony of intellect, emotion, and character into the concrete reality of modern existence. Begin with the discipline of clarity. Set aside time each day to examine your thoughts. Maimonides believed that the mind becomes strong when it is accustomed to distinguishing truth from illusion. The modern world overwhelms the mind with noise, opinion, distraction, and stimulus. To live with clarity, one must carve out moments for reflection. A few minutes of quiet thought, without interruption, can sharpen perception more effectively than an hour of scattered attention. Ask yourself, what is real, what is imagined, what is emotion, and what is fact? This simple act of separation is the foundation of mental strength. The next step is the cultivation of moderation. According to Maimonides, the well-balanced mind is the one that avoids extremes. In daily life, this means recognizing when emotions pull too strongly in one direction. If anger rises quickly, slow it. If fear becomes constant, question it. If desire intensifies, temper it. The goal is not suppression, but equilibrium. When you feel yourself slipping toward an extreme, pause, breathe, recenter. This act of momentary restraint is one of the finest exercises of strength. Each time you return to balance, you fortify the inner architecture of the soul. A crucial principle in Maimonides' system is the training of habit. The mind becomes strong through repeated actions, just as the body becomes strong through physical exercise. Select one virtue to practice consistently. It may be patience, restraint, humility, or calmness. Each day, commit to one deliberate act that expresses this virtue. If patience is your choice, respond gently when frustration arises. If calmness is your aim, take a moment of silence before reacting. If humility is your focus, listen more carefully than you speak. Over time, these repetitions shape the soul until the virtue becomes natural, not forced. Equally important is the discipline of avoiding harmful habits. Maimonides warns that the soul is shaped just as deeply by what it avoids as by what it practices. Identify the impulses or reactions that weaken you. It may be the quickness of anger, the habit of worrying, the tendency to imagine the worst, or the pull of comparison. Each time you refrain from indulging a harmful impulse, you take control of your inner life. This refusal is itself a form of strength. It is the reclaiming of territory from the forces that scatter the mind and weaken the will. Maimonides also emphasizes the intimate connection between physical health and mental clarity. The body, he argues, is the vessel through which the mind operates. A neglected body clouds judgment, intensifies negative emotion, and undermines resilience. Practical wisdom, therefore, requires caring for physical well-being. Eat with moderation, sleep sufficiently, move your body to release tension, seek fresh air and sunlight. These are not merely health recommendations, they are spiritual disciplines. When the body is balanced, the mind gains stability. When the body is overburdened, the mind loses symmetry. Another dimension of mental strength in Maimonides' thought is intellectual humility. Practice questioning your assumptions, remain open to new ideas, recognize the limits of your knowledge. Arrogance is the enemy of clarity. It blinds the intellect to truth. When you feel certain, pause and examine the basis of your confidence. When you feel confused, acknowledge it. This humility is not weakness. It is the courage to live honestly within the boundaries of understanding, and it clears the way for genuine insight to emerge. One of the most powerful tools in Maimonides' system is the training of the imagination. In modern life, imagination often becomes the engine of anxiety. It generates fears, assumptions, and scenarios that weaken the mind. To strengthen the imagination, direct it deliberately. Use it to visualize virtue, not catastrophe. Use it to anticipate wise action, not failure. When your imagination races toward fearful possibilities, guide it gently back to what is known and real. Over time, this reorientation disciplines the imagination, allowing it to serve the intellect rather than overpower it. Equally vital is the cultivation of emotional patience. Many people believe that emotions must be suppressed or ignored, but Maimonides teaches a different approach. Emotions must be understood. When anger arises, look at its cause. When fear appears, examine its source. When sadness comes, allow it, but also explore its meaning. Emotional patience allows the mind to respond rather than react. It gives the intellect time to interpret before emotion becomes action. In this way, patience is not simply restraint. It is the quiet strength of allowing truth to emerge before the soul moves. A practical application of Maimonidesism involves aligning one's actions with a higher purpose. The mind grows strong when life has direction. Set goals that reflect your deepest values. Seek wisdom through study. Contribute to the well-being of others. Engage in acts of kindness discreetly. These practices stabilize the soul, for meaning is one of the strongest foundations of mental resilience. A life without purpose is easily shaken. A life with purpose can withstand far greater adversity. Another essential practice is truthfulness. Not merely honesty in speech, but honesty in perception. Be truthful with yourself about your motives, your fears, your desires, your weaknesses, your strengths. Maimonides teaches that illusion weakens the mind. The more a person hides from truth, the more fragile they become. To be truthful, even when truth is uncomfortable, is to anchor oneself in reality. This anchoring is one of the deepest forms of mental strength. Finally, Maimonides calls us to cultivate a contemplative awareness of the divine order within which we live. Even for those who do not approach spirituality through formal religion, this awareness takes the form of recognizing the structure, beauty, and wisdom in the natural world. Look at the intricacies of life. Observe the harmony of nature. Reflect on the vastness of existence. Contemplation elevates the mind beyond the immediate, beyond the small disturbances of daily life. It situates the self within a larger framework, and in doing so it provides perspective. Perspective is one of the strongest shields the mind can possess. In practical terms, this means pausing throughout the day to reflect on the order of the world. Notice the sunrise. Observe the rhythm of the seasons. Consider the complexity of a single thought, the miracle of the body, the vastness of the universe. This contemplative practice strengthens the mind by lifting it above the turbulence of emotion and grounding it in something enduring. Mental strength, in the Maimonidean sense, is not achieved through intensity, but through consistency. It is not found in moments of extraordinary resolve, but in the steady discipline of shaping the soul. It is a balance of intellect and emotion, a harmony of habit and intention, a unity of truth and action. It is the quiet, steady work of building a life aligned with reality. To live with mental strength is to live with clarity, balance, purpose, humility, and reverence. It is to carry within oneself a calm center that no circumstance can easily disturb. It is to walk through the world not as a prisoner of emotion, but as a lover of truth. It is to rise slowly but steadily toward a life shaped by wisdom. In the end, the Maimonidean path does not promise freedom from struggle. It promises the resources to meet struggle with dignity. It teaches that the mind can learn to stand firm, the soul can learn to harmonize, and the human being can, through disciplined clarity, become a vessel for understanding. This is the practical path to mental strength. Not a shortcut, not a technique, but a way of life grounded in wisdom, illuminated by reason, and elevated by the quiet light of the Spirit.